Hey there, curious minds. Tonight, we're diving deep into something that might make you press your tongue against your teeth just to double-check they are still behaving. Picture this: wind licking through dry grass, warm sand shifting beneath your feet, and somewhere off in the distance, the dull thud of a mortar and pestle pounding out a rhythm older than history itself. You walk slowly into the outer edge of a Nubian village, the thatched huts clustered like sun-baked seashells, and the air carries the earthy scent of fermented grain, river clay, and something else. Something sharp and metallic, like old blood or broken pottery. There's no toothpaste here, no floss, no awkward dentist with a weirdly enthusiastic attitude toward gums. Only the ancient wisdom of survival, handed down by those who couldn't afford to wait for modern medicine to be invented. And let's be honest, if you lived out here and woke up with a throbbing molar, you probably wouldn't survive this, unless someone knew exactly how to make spoiled grain your best friend. Quick favor: before you dive into full-on relaxation mode, consider liking and subscribing. It helps more than you know, and I genuinely appreciate it if you do. If not, no worries, I'm just glad you're here. And hey, if you're listening from somewhere special, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always amazing to see where these stories find you. Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. Let's take a moment to leave the noise of the day behind. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Intro word count: 205. You begin your trek in the pale orange haze of late afternoon, stepping carefully across a landscape that's been walked by kings, traders, and people whose names were never carved into stone. The terrain is cracked and dry, but the Nile whispers not far away, just beyond a soft curtain of tamarisk trees and golden papyrus. There's a pulse to this place, a heatbeat in the earth itself, and the deeper you go, the more the modern world falls away behind you. A child runs past with a string of millet grains tied around her wrist, giggling as she balances a pot of foamy liquid that sloshes with each step. You follow the scent, which grows stronger the closer you get to the central hut, the one with a roof darker than the rest, patched with layers of hardened mud and palm fronds. Inside, it's dim and cool, the air filled with the almost sour scent of fermentation. A woman sits cross-legged near the fire, her face calm and lined with wisdom, stirring a ceramic bowl of grain mash with slow, practiced care. She looks up at you with eyes that seem to already know why you're here. You nod politely, then motion toward your jaw. It throbs again, almost on cue. She doesn't speak, just gestures for you to sit and places a hand gently against your cheek. Her fingers are warm, slightly rough, but kind. She presses just beneath your ear, then your chin, then right against the sore spot. And oh yes, there it is. Ancient dentistry has entered the chat. You notice a shallow clay basin near her feet, filled with a frothy mixture that smells like bread left out too long. This isn't your average home brew. This is medicine, crafted from barley, millet, sometimes sorghum. It's been sitting in the sun just long enough to let the bacteria work their magic. Not magic in the unicorn sparkle sense, but in the real microbial way. Brewing cultures of streptomyces and lactobacillus, which modern science tells us can produce compounds suspiciously similar to modern antibiotics. But at this point, You're just hoping it doesn't taste like donkey spit. She scoops some of the mash into a palm-sized gourd and hands it to you. You hesitate, watching a thin line of bubbles fizz along the rim. Then you tip it back. It's gritty, slightly warm, tangy with an aftertaste of wet stone, but not unbearable. Your tongue tingles, your mouth waters in defense, and oddly, the sharpest edges of your pain seem to dull just a little. It's not an accident. Fermented grain wasn't just a staple of Nubian diet. It was a medical tool, deliberately brewed and sometimes even buried in warm earth for days to let nature cook up its bacterial cocktail. Historians still argue whether the Nubians understood the microbiology at play, or if their brilliance was rooted more in tradition and trial and error than in laboratory logic. But either way, it worked. In fact, when archaeologists exhumed some Nubian skeletons from as early as 350 AD, they found traces of tetracycline, an actual antibiotic, embedded in the bones. Not from pills, but from beer. The healer nods approvingly as you wipe your mouth. She adds a pinch of ash and clay to the remaining mash, stirs it into a paste, then uses a tiny wooden spatula to dab it onto your gums. It stings, a lot, but the heat fades into numbness, and for the first time since you arrived, you unclench your jaw. She hums low in her throat as she works, her voice rising and falling like river water hitting stone. The sound makes your eyelids heavy. And here's the wild part. None of this was ever written down. No scrolls, no instruction manuals. Just the oral passing of wisdom from grandmother to granddaughter, echoing through generations like birdsong across the savannah. The mash itself was different every time, sometimes brewed longer, sometimes mixed with wild honey, date syrup, or crushed herbs like senna and fenugreek. Each healer had her own signature blend, her own sense of how long to let the grain bubble before it was ready. Outside, the sun sinks lower, casting long shadows from the tall Nubian wheat that sways in the breeze. You step out of the hut and feel the warmth of the paste lingering on your gums. Your pain isn't gone, not completely, but it's faded, like a memory you're not sure you trust anymore. You watch as another batch of barley mash is poured into a woven basket and left near the fire to ferment overnight. The air smells alive, like something ancient is still working, still breathing, still fighting back against decay. You sit beneath a low acacia tree and close your eyes. In the distance, drums begin to thrum, a slow, low beat that mimics the pounding of the pestles in the grain huts. It's the rhythm of a people who lived hard, loved long, and figured out how to make spoiled grain save lives. Not bad for a civilization you rarely hear about outside dusty museum placards and footnotes in Egyptian history. And just before sleep tugs at your spine, you hear the child again, still giggling, still balancing that pot of frothy medicine like the world depends on it. Which, in a way, it kind of did. Toothache in the time of pharaohs, the pain pulses behind your cheek like a tiny war drum, each beat reminding you that even in a world without processed sugar or dentists named Rick, teeth still found ways to revolt. You shift uncomfortably on a woven mat inside the healer's hut as she prepares another bowl of fermented mash, this one darker, thicker, and flecked with ground seeds and what looks like a crushed beetle wing. You don't ask questions. In Nubia, trust is part of the medicine. Across from you, the healer's apprentice, no older than 12, watches you like a falcon might study a limping gazelle. She doesn't blink much. Eventually, she leans forward and touches her own jaw with 2 fingers, mirroring your pain. Then she mimics biting something hard, frowns dramatically, and opens her mouth to reveal, well, not much tooth left. A crater where a molar once was. Welcome to ancient dental empathy. Here's the thing people forget. Nubia wasn't some barren strip of sand clinging to Egypt's southern coattails. It was a powerful civilization with its own kings, Kushite rulers who once turned the tables and sat on Egyptian thrones. They had gold mines, pyramids, and temples of their own, many now half buried in desert hush. But even royalty couldn't escape the wrath of a rotting tooth. And you, sitting there with barley paste seeping into your gums, are getting a taste, literally, of how they fought back. The healer finishes mixing and begins to chant softly. It's not the dramatic movie kind of chanting, no raised arms or ritual knives, just a low, almost motherly hum threaded with ancient syllables. You close your eyes and let the rhythm of her voice massage the back of your skull. The air inside the hut thickens with the scent of smoldering herbs, eucalyptus, myrrh, maybe even garlic. Your tongue tingles. It's not clear whether it's from the potion or the smoke curling around your head like a sleepy serpent. You think of how many must have sat exactly where you are. People from every class, warriors with shattered incisors, farmers with grain-worn molars, and children like the apprentice with early-onset dental despair. And unlike you, they didn't have the option to Google natural toothache remedies or chug a bottle of ibuprofen. They had only what the land, the river, and fermented wisdom could offer. Modern researchers have puzzled over how these Nubian treatments came to be. Was it divine inspiration, the trial and error of desperate mouths, or did some ancient genius notice that people who drank certain brews stopped complaining about tooth pain? Historians still argue whether this was medicine by accident or innovation by design. Either way, the results are etched into jawbones pulled from ancient burial grounds. And what those jawbones tell us is fascinating. Many of them show minimal dental decay, especially considering the grain-heavy diet of the time. But then there are the exceptions. Skulls where abscesses left craters in the bone, molars cracked down the middle. Evidence of long, slow suffering that no amount of fermented barley could silence. And this duality is important. Not every ancient Nubian walked around with a perfect smile, but some clearly walked around without pain, and that's a miracle worth whispering about. You open your eyes and notice the apprentice is now threading small beads into a leather cord. Each bead looks like a seed, but they're actually tiny, polished teeth, probably from animals. Hopefully, she offers it to you like a trophy, and you tie it around your wrist because, frankly, you'll take all the good tooth karma you can get right now. Outside the hut, the sun is climbing again, warming the clay pots arranged in a crescent around the fire pit. Each one is labeled with a carved mark, an inverted triangle, a zigzag, a coiled spiral. These aren't random doodles. Each symbol stands for a specific brew time, a fermentation length, a combination of ingredients tailored to different ailments. You spy one with a mark that looks like an open mouth, and the apprentice nods toward it knowingly. The toothache jar, classic branding. The healer retrieves a second dose from that very jar and offers it to you in a half coconut shell. You sip, and this time the taste hits different. Less sour, more earthy, with a mild fizz that prickles your upper lip. The heat in your jaw fades a little more, and you swear your ears are ringing less now too. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe this particular brew knows how to walk up to pain, shake its hand, and gently escort it out of your skull. You glance around the hut, now noticing more details. Animal bones lashed into tools. A woven tapestry depicting what looks like someone biting a snake. And in the corner, near a bundle of drying herbs, sits a small wooden mask. Just a face with one exaggerated cheek bulging out. A dental spirit, perhaps. Some ancient guardian of molars and misery. It's creepy and comforting all at once. And as the healer works, you realize that what's happening here isn't just medicine, it's a ritual. A performance of care that blends sensory elements to soothe both body and mind. The heat of the room, the smoky scent, the chanting, the drink, all designed to pull you away from panic and closer to peace. And yes, that might be placebo, but your tooth doesn't care what it's called. It just wants to stop hurting. Back outside, a group of villagers sits near the fire, their laughter floating like feathers across the breeze. One older man holds a small ceramic bottle and sips carefully, then points to his lower jaw and nods proudly. A survivor of the same war you're fighting. He motions for you to join them, and as you sit, he tells you in broken phrases and wide gestures how the brew saved him from the biting ghost, which you assume is local slang for nerve pain, or possibly an actual ghost. Either way, you nod respectfully. As dusk begins to fall, painting everything in shades of deep gold and indigo, you feel something shift. Your jaw is no longer clenched. The firelight flickers gently across smiling faces. The pain is quieter now, still present like a sulking child in the corner, but not in control anymore. You're not healed, but you're heard. And in a world without fillings, floss, or fluoride, that's a small kind of miracle. The apprentice returns, this time with a new gift. A piece of soft linen soaked in fermented mash and wrapped around a sliver of eucalyptus bark. A compress. She motions for you to place it along your gum line and rest. You do as instructed, and the moment it touches your skin, the dull ache gives way to a sleepy kind of warmth, like your mouth is curling up for a nap. The healer sits beside you now, hands folded, watching the fire crackle. No rush, no ceremony, just the slow unraveling of pain under the quiet stars of ancient Nubia. And you, with a strange mixture of barley, herbs, and grit soaking into your mouth, are finally beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, people have known how to heal longer than we've known how to explain it. You wake before dawn with the taste of earth and grain still clinging to the back of your throat. The compress has fallen loose sometime in the night, landing in the dust near your elbow, but its work is done for now. The fire has gone to embers, and above you, the sky is stretching itself open in soft bruises of purple and pink. The air is cool, the kind of cool that belongs to rivers and gods. You stretch your jaw tentatively, half expecting the pain to return with a vengeance, but instead, it greets you like an old enemy who's decided not to fight today. You rise quietly, stepping around sleeping forms and scattered tools, careful not to disturb the stillness that blankets everything. The apprentice stirs and sits up, hair wild and haloed by sleep. She watches you with a half smile, then points toward the Nile. You nod. There's more to learn, more to feel. And toothaches, it turns out, are only part of the story. You walk slowly along the bank where the reeds nod in rhythm to the breeze. There, by a shallow bend in the river, a group of women gather with baskets, pots, and long wooden paddles. Their arms are strong, marked by years of lifting, stirring, crushing, brewing. The rhythm of life here isn't based on clocks. It's tuned to the sounds of grain soaking, fermenting, whispering its secrets into the air. You sit near one of the larger vats, just a sun-warmed clay basin sunk into the earth and crusted with dried foam, and inhale deeply. The scent is stronger here, more aggressive. It makes your eyes water slightly. It also makes your molars stop pulsing. Coincidence? You're past questioning that now. One of the women kneels beside you and pulls a soft, sticky cake from the edge of the vat. It's darker than yesterday's mixture, nearly black and riddled with sharp smells. She tears off a piece, rolls it between her fingers, and gestures for you to open wide. This is no snack. It's medicine round two. You hesitate just for a moment, then bite down carefully. It's chewy and bitter, like old olives left too long in the sun. But your mouth floods with saliva almost immediately, and something in the back of your brain whispers that this is exactly what it's supposed to do. You chew slowly, letting the mash coat every corner of your gums, and you swear you feel the sharp edge of pain dull even further. Not gone, but manageable. Like a song turned down to a hum, what's astonishing is how organized this all is. Each woman knows her task. One stirs, one strains, another watches the shadows cast by a nearby stick to time the fermentation. This isn't random. It's science draped in tradition, and it's as precise as any pharmacy. The mix they've given you today? It's older than the healer's batch, left to ferment for 7 days in sun and shadow. And according to the apprentice, that's when the sour fire wakes up. Sour fire, you repeat to yourself, letting the phrase roll around your tongue like a new prayer. Historians still argue whether the Nubians had a formal understanding of microbial cultures, or if they simply recognized patterns over centuries of observation. But what's undeniable is that their methods produced real, measurable effects. Some scholars even believe this style of brewing, unique to Upper Nubia, was deliberately manipulated to foster certain bacteria strains. Others say it was luck, divine or otherwise. You chew your mash and figure maybe it doesn't matter. Intentional or not, it works. And here comes your fringe fact for the day. There's evidence that some Nubian tribes used not just fermented grain, but also ground up bones in their toothache paste. Why? Possibly for calcium. Possibly for magic. Possibly because someone dared them and it just stuck. Archaeologists have found jars sealed with animal bones, mixed with malt and ash, likely stored for use in more severe cases. And while chewing on bone grit might sound barbaric now, you have to admit, if your gums were screaming, you'd probably try it too. The apprentice kneels beside you and gently turns your head to examine your jaw. She presses the spot again, the one that made your eyes water yesterday. But this time, the pain doesn't bite back. It hums quietly, yes, but like a dog who's been fed. She nods solemnly, then offers a final bite of mash and a thin sip of what you now recognize as proto-beer. Not enough to make you drunk, but enough to make the world soften around the edges. It feels like being held, by bacteria. You're beginning to understand now that fermented grain wasn't just about fighting pain. It was about balance, harmony, keeping the body's heat and cold, wet and dry, fire and water in check. The Nubians weren't just healers. They were alchemists of flavor and fermentation, treating the mouth like a sacred gateway between spirit and body. And when the mouth hurt, when that gate swelled with agony, it was a sign something deeper was out of rhythm. The woman beside you begins to sing as she stirs the next batch. The melody loops gently, each repetition smoothing the air like a stone polishing water. You don't understand the words, but the song feels like a lullaby, like something your bones remember even if your mind doesn't. The apprentice hums along, and you do too, almost unconsciously. Your hands begin to mirror the stirring motion, moving in circles over your lap. It's hypnotic. Then the wind shifts. A strong gust from the south, carrying the sharp scent of herbs from a nearby bundle. You inhale and immediately feel your sinuses open. Your molar throbs once, one last sharp pulse, then recedes like the tide pulling away from shore. The woman glances at you, satisfied. This wind, she says with a nod, is good medicine. Better than the river sometimes. You believe her. You're ready to believe anything now. You spend the morning there by the river, chewing fermented cakes, sipping spiced brew, and learning the gestures of a healing culture that doesn't separate medicine from daily life. It's all part of the same dance. The grain, the river, the hands, the pain, the relief. And just before you leave, the apprentice paints a small line of ochre just beneath your eye. A mark, she says, to remind the pain not to return. You press your tongue to your molar again and find only silence, stillness, maybe even peace. The song continues behind you as you walk back toward the village, and the smell of fresh mash rises with the heat. It's all still working, this sacred, bubbling knowledge. And tonight, if the pain creeps back, you'll know what to do. You'll return to the fire, to the ferment, to the hands that stir and soothe. Because here in ancient Nubia, when the mouth cries out, the land answers back. And you've learned how to listen. You're getting good at this now. The slow walk to the healer's hut, the respectful nods to the elder women by the river, even the way you hold your jaw just slightly open to ease the lingering tenderness. All of it has become part of a rhythm, a quiet choreography in the dance between you and your pain. And though the throb still exists in the background, like a drum muffled by thick curtains, it no longer controls you. It merely reminds you that something ancient is at work inside your bones. Today, the apprentice leads you farther away from the village. Not with words, just gestures and glances, as if she's letting you in on a secret passed down through nods alone. You follow a narrow footpath threaded between date palms and tamarisk, your sandals brushing dust into the morning air. Eventually, you arrive at a low stone platform surrounded by thorn bushes and guarded, somewhat dramatically, by a statue of a crocodile with a toothy grin. You're not sure if it's meant to be comforting or ominous. Either way, it sets the mood. The apprentice points at your jaw, then at the crocodile, and then at a small depression in the stone platform that contains, you guessed it, more fermented mash. This batch is thick and grainy, almost like wet clay, and it smells aggressively sour, like bread left in the sun for too long. You dip a finger in it and press the paste gently to your gum line, feeling the immediate tingle of something alive moving against the pain. It's not a sharp feeling, just a kind of bubbling warmth that travels up the side of your face, like carbonated medicine. Somehow, the crocodile statue looks pleased. This spot, it turns out, is a shrine. Not just to Sobek, the crocodile god, but to something even older, an ancestral force the villagers call the Bone Whisperer. According to the apprentice, this entity watches over all things skeletal, from cracked femurs to aching molars. Offerings of fermented grain are left here regularly, not just for healing, but as a form of gratitude. You realize, with a slightly unsettling lurch of your stomach, that the mash you just applied to your face is probably sacred. Oops. Still, nobody yells at you. The apprentice simply smiles and hands you a small pouch made from stitched goat hide. Inside are 3 things: a sliver of dried ginger root, a piece of soft wood bark, and a few dark seeds that rattle like tiny bones. These are what she calls dry companions, meant to be chewed slowly between treatments to help keep the pain from coming back. You pop one of the seeds into your mouth. It's bitter at first, then surprisingly sweet, and it floods your palate with a flavor like fennel and smoke. Your tooth doesn't exactly cheer, but it doesn't complain either. Historians still argue whether these dry companions were chosen for their antiseptic properties or their spiritual associations. Some say the ginger root acted as a numbing agent, while others point to old carvings showing priests offering bark to statues, suggesting ritual use instead of pharmacology. Either way, the chewing works. And in a place where a toothache could mean weeks of agony, or worse, chewing something helpful was probably considered a holy act. You sit by the shrine for a while, watching ants spiral around the base of the platform and lizards dart between cracks in the rock. The heat is starting to rise now, and the scent of the ferment has soaked into your hands, your skin, maybe even your hair. You smell like medicine, like healing on 2 legs, and for the first time, you're okay with that. The apprentice shows you how to mix your own batch, barefoot, standing in a hollowed-out stone basin, pounding soaked barley with a long, smooth pole made from acacia wood. The rhythm is steady: lift, drop, stir, step. You fall into the pattern like you were born into it, and the ache in your jaw becomes part of the motion. Not an interruption, but an echo. As you pound the grain, a woman nearby adds a handful of dried leaves to the mixture and mutters something under her breath. You recognize a few of the words: bitter, wind, and mouth. It's a recipe and a prayer rolled into one. When the mixture reaches the right consistency, thick but loose, like batter left out overnight, it's scooped into a carved gourd and set in the sun with a flat rock on top. Fermentation time begins. You mark the starting shadow with a line in the dirt, same as they did generations ago. No clocks, no thermometers, just sunlight and instinct. It's beautiful, and also slightly terrifying, because if you mess this up, your reward is either disappointment or diarrhea. Possibly both. That afternoon, you return to the healer's hut, where the air hangs heavy with heat and cedar smoke. She examines your jaw once more, her fingers cool and dry as river stones, and nods approvingly. She presses a new compress to your cheek, this one soaked not in mash, but in a mixture made from wild honey and fermented fig skin. It smells like dessert and medicine had a weird baby, and the sensation against your gums is electric. In a good way. You think back to the shrine and wonder how many people made that same trek over the centuries. How many brought their pain there, not knowing if they'd return with relief or simply more time to wait it out? Toothaches weren't just physical back then. They were spiritual trials. Messages from ancestors or warnings from the gods, depending on who you asked. One cracked molar could mean a lesson you hadn't learned, a debt you hadn't repaid, or maybe it just meant you chewed the wrong nut at the wrong angle. Interpretations vary. What's certain is that these ancient Nubians didn't separate healing into neat categories the way we do now. For them, there was no line between medicine and ritual, no checkbox for physical versus spiritual. If it helped the pain go away, it was worth doing. If it tasted terrible but made the swelling fade, it became tradition. And if it worked more than once, it became sacred. That's how medical systems evolve, through a mix of trial, error, superstition, and stubbornness, and maybe a little fermented barley. Before bed, the apprentice gives you a final treat, a small, sweet roll made of pounded dates and barley mash, pressed into the shape of a tooth and dusted with ground mint leaves. You laugh carefully. It's both adorable and mildly alarming, especially when she tells you to eat it slowly and thank the ghost between bites. You assume she means the pain or the spirit of the crocodile statue. Either way, you chew with reverence. As you settle down to sleep, the fire crackles softly and the compress on your jaw radiates warmth. Outside, the wind rattles the reeds like someone whispering a very old lullaby. You think of the shrine, the crocodile, the bubbling mash, the dry companions in your pouch. And for a moment, you wonder how many modern remedies began in places just like this. Not in labs, but in huts, around fires, with fermented grain and whispered songs. Your toothache, once a brutal little tyrant, now feels like a weary guest deciding whether to stay or leave. You hope it chooses the latter, but either way, you know something the pain doesn't. You've found your tools, you've learned the recipes, and if it dares return, you'll meet it again, with mash, with song, with the heat of the Nubian sun in your hands. By now, the routine has a rhythm to it. You wake with the sun streaming across the woven mat, stretch your stiff limbs, and run your tongue cautiously along your gums, checking for signs of mutiny. It's still there, that dull reminder of your dental rebellion, but it's quieter today. Less of a scream, more of a mumble. You sit up, grateful for the silence and for the growing weight of knowledge settling into your bones like silt in the bend of a river. The apprentice is already waiting outside the hut, hands clasped behind her back like someone holding either wisdom or mischief. Possibly both. She motions for you to follow and leads you back to the fermentation pits. Not the sacred shrine this time, but a much more workaday stretch of ground near the granary where ordinary people treat their ailments with a mix of hope, practice, and leftover barley. Here, the atmosphere feels less mystical, more practical. Flies buzz lazily in the heat. Children run past with sticky hands and loud opinions. Someone drops a gourd and curses in a dialect that sounds a bit too modern to be entirely ancient. Your job today is to learn about balance. Not yoga pose balance, but the kind that keeps you from accidentally fermenting something into poison instead of medicine. Because, fun fact, if you let the grain ferment too long, or if it's stored in the wrong kind of pot, it can produce compounds that don't exactly soothe your toothache so much as send you into a nap that never ends. The Nubians knew this, not just from experience, but from a system of trial and error passed down through generations of suspicious grandmothers and observant midwives. You watch as a woman examines a fresh mash batch, her fingers moving with the expertise of someone who's ruined enough brews to know what too fizzy really means. The jars used here are coated inside with beeswax, sealing the porous ceramic and slowing down fermentation. A clever trick, and according to some fringe scholars, that beeswax might have had antimicrobial properties of its own, adding another accidental layer of healing to the process. Others argue the wax was mostly for flavor preservation or bug resistance. Historians still debate whether the healing came from intention or happy accident, but you're starting to think the line between the two is thinner than we pretend. You spend most of the morning stirring. Not metaphorically, though you've certainly been doing a bit of that in people's routines. No, you're given a long wooden paddle and assigned to a pot of mash that smells like it's on the verge of becoming self-aware. Your job is to stir slowly, keeping the top from drying out and preventing the bottom from scorching in the midday heat. The sun bakes the ground around you, and your jaw starts to ache again, not from the tooth, but from clenching too hard in the heat. You remember the pouch of dry companions in your satchel and pop another seed between your molars. The flavor blooms like wild herbs and quiet thunderstorms. Still bitter, still worth it. Midday brings a lesson in trade. A traveling merchant arrives in the village, skin darkened from sun and road dust, his pack bulging with goods. Among the usual tools and beads, he carries a small bundle wrapped in palm leaves. Inside, what looks like a clump of moldy wheat. The healer, seeing your puzzled expression, chuckles and explains it's penicillium-rich grain from up north, used by some healers to treat abscesses and infections. The villagers call it skyroot, a nickname that makes no botanical sense but sounds poetic enough to believe. You raise an eyebrow and think, did ancient Nubians accidentally discover proto-penicillin? Historians still argue whether this counts as deliberate antibiotic use, but here, no one's arguing. They're just applying it to a boil and moving on with their day. After the merchant leaves, you're given another dose of the medicinal mash, this time warmed slightly and mixed with a dab of goat milk and crushed fig seeds. The resulting mixture is creamy, tangy, and just weird enough to make your eyebrows dance. You apply it to your gum with a piece of linen dipped in river water. The relief is almost instant. There's something to be said for texture, temperature, and ritual all aligning like stars on the night you finally sleep through the pain. You sit near the edge of the riverbank as dusk settles in, the sky stained with streaks of copper and blood orange. The apprentice joins you, carrying a reed basket with something heavy inside. She sets it down and lifts the lid to reveal an entire roasted fish stuffed with fermented barley mash and herbs. You blink. She grins. Apparently, tonight's meal doubles as dental maintenance. You're instructed to chew gently, more gumming than chomping, letting the seasoned mash coat your tongue and drift toward the ache like little edible peacekeepers. And you have to admit, it's working. Whether by placebo, biology, or sheer culinary sorcery, your jaw unclenches and the tension drains from your temples like a tide rolling back. You sip warm beer, a cloudy, flat mixture thick with floating bits of grain, and feel it slide down your throat with the slow assurance of something brewed with more instinct than instruction. The beer itself, a fermented barley drink with traces of lactic acid and mild alcohol, was likely a staple of Nubian life. More nutritious than intoxicating, it carried antibacterial properties that may have helped keep their teeth cleaner than one might expect. Historians still debate whether it served a purely health-related purpose or doubled as a social lubricant, but given how you feel right now, both seem true. Later that evening, you're invited to witness a purification ritual. It's not about the tooth per se, but more about aligning your body with healing energies, or at least keeping any bad spirits from reinfecting your gum line. You're given a necklace made of dried river, clay beads, and thin slivers of fermented date bark. It smells like something that should repel insects or maybe attract curious cats, but it's part of the ritual and you wear it without complaint. The elder sprinkles a line of fermented mash across your forehead and whispers a blessing. You can't understand the words, but you feel them settle into your skin like warm rain. You lie down under a canopy of reeds woven into spirals, the fire nearby crackling softly. The air is rich with the scent of burnt acacia and old barley. The pain is still there, muffled, reduced, but now it feels like something being slowly escorted out of your body rather than a squatter digging deeper in. You press a piece of bark against your cheek and think about how much your understanding of healing has changed in just a few days. This wasn't just a treatment, it was a philosophy. A practice built not around controlling nature, but listening to it. Letting it teach you, mash by mash, whisper by whisper. And for all the debate modern scholars have about whether these methods were real medicine, you're starting to think the line between real and ritual is a modern fiction. Here, in this village, in this hut, on this night, you are healing, and that's all that matters. The fire crackles louder now as someone tosses on another handful of dried tamarisk. Sparks dance into the air like fleeting ideas. You watch them fade and wonder if any of your ancestors ever made this journey. If they too sat by the river with a swollen jaw and a mouthful of mash, wondering what came next. Maybe healing isn't something we invent. Maybe it's something we remember. You drift off with the scent of grain and smoke in your nose and the taste of barley still ghosting your tongue. Tomorrow, you'll learn more. But for tonight, you let your body float into stillness, carried by the wisdom of fermented seeds and the quiet hush of Nubian twilight. When you wake this time, there's a strange sensation in your mouth, like your gums have called a truce with the rest of your face. The aching is distant, quieter than it's been in days, like a drunk relative muttering in another room instead of shouting in your ear. You sit up slowly, careful not to disturb this delicate peace, and as you stretch, you realize something important. You're not just surviving this process, you're kind of learning to trust it. The apprentice meets you with a small bowl of crushed charcoal and salt. Breakfast? Not quite. This is the Nubian version of brushing your teeth, a mixture of river clay, ash, and sometimes powdered oyster shell, rubbed on with a stick that's been split into soft bristles at the end. You're given one of these sticks, a miswak, maybe, or something similar. You rub it gently along your teeth, tasting minerals and wood and something vaguely peppery. And while your modern instincts scream for minty foam and buzzing electric motors, there's something grounding about this ritual. You scrub carefully, conscious of the tender pocket in your gums, and spit into the dust with the satisfaction of someone who knows exactly what's in their toothpaste. This morning's lesson is a bit intimate. The healer wants to talk about breath, not metaphorical breath, not life force or spirit wind, but your actual physical breath. Because bad breath, it turns out, was often the first signal that something was wrong inside the mouth, and ancient Nubians were surprisingly attentive to it. They called it by various names depending on the region. Some translations suggest phrases like hot wind or sour tongue. The solution? A kind of mouth rinse made from fermented fig juice, tamarind pulp, and wait for it, dried crocodile dung. Yep, you swish it reluctantly, bracing for horror, but to your surprise, it's earthy, a bit sour, and not the worst thing you've tasted this week. You ask why crocodile dung, hoping there's a compelling scientific reason and not just a cruel joke played on outsiders. The healer shrugs and offers a proverb instead, something about strength passed through predators. Historians still argue whether ingredients like this held antimicrobial properties or symbolic significance, but the people using them never seemed confused. They knew what worked, even if they didn't know why. As the sun climbs higher, the healer decides it's time to show you the pain tree. You're skeptical, half expecting a metaphor or a prank, but no. This is a real tree, towering and knotted, its bark deeply scored with grooves from generations of people carving out medicine. Locals call it kesra, and its sap, when tapped and fermented lightly in terracotta pots, yields a bitter resin with mild numbing effects. Think ancient Novocaine, but more flavorful. You're handed a small ball of cloth soaked in this sap and told to press it against your gum. The relief is almost instant, a tingling cold that spreads like moonlight on water. The healer smiles knowingly, as if to say, "Told you so." Lunch today is a porridge made with fermented millet and dried river herbs. It's less about flavor and more about not disturbing your tooth. You eat slowly, mindful, aware of every chew and shift of your jaw. And maybe it's the hunger, maybe it's the medicine still buzzing in your bloodstream, but the porridge tastes amazing. Like earth and time had a baby. You even ask for seconds, and the cook, an older woman with arms like woven rope, grins and tells you that's a good sign. Means your body wants to stay, she says. You're not sure if she means in the village or just alive. In the afternoon, you're asked to assist with a treatment for someone else. A young boy with swollen cheeks and tears streaking through dust on his face. He's scared. You recognize that fear. It's the same one you carried just a few nights ago. You help prepare the mash, this time with a touch of fermented pomegranate rind and honey. You apply it gently, mimicking the healer's movements, and the boy watches you with wide eyes. His breathing slows. The tension drains. And just like that, you've moved from patient to practitioner. This shift isn't lost on the village. That evening, you're invited to the fire circle, not just as a guest, but as someone allowed to speak. You're given a carved gourd of beer and told to share what you've learned. You're hesitant at first, unsure how to put all this into words without sounding like a confused tourist or a weird history blogger. But as the stars come out and the beer warms your belly, the words come. You talk about pain, about trusting plants you can't pronounce, about the strange calm that fermented grain brings when applied with care. and about the lesson that maybe healing isn't about curing so much as about making space for the body to remember what it's supposed to feel like. The elders nod. One of them claps your shoulder. Another refills your gourd. You feel, oddly, at home. That night, under a thick blanket stitched with faded symbols and old sweat, you dream of barley fields, of wind passing over grain heads that sway like dancers, of mouths that no longer hurt, of hands pressing mash into swollen gums, not as a last resort, but as a first response. The morning will bring new tasks, there's always more to learn, but for tonight, you let the silence press gently against your chest. You're healing. And in a strange, fermented way, you're helping others heal too. Whether this was science or sorcery, you no longer care. The barley knows. The tree knows. Your mouth knows. And that's enough. You wake to the smell of smoke and wild mint, the kind of scent that seeps into your bones and makes you forget where the dream ended. A breeze slips through the reeds above your head, and for the first time in what feels like forever, your jaw isn't the first thing you notice. No dull throb, no fiery pulse, just stillness. Not the total absence of pain, maybe, but something so close it makes you hesitate to move, as if shifting might wake the ache again. You stay still for a moment longer, listening to the morning rustle of the village, the chatter of birds, the clink of pottery, the occasional grumble from someone whose night was shorter than they'd planned. You rise and make your way to the healer's hut without being summoned, like someone reporting for duty. And it's a good thing you do, because today, you're learning about what happens when the fermentation fails. Because sometimes it does. The mash can spoil, the grain can mold, or worse, it can attract the wrong kinds of fungi, and ancient Nubians knew this. You're shown a clay jar tucked away behind the hut, sealed with wax but marked with a zigzag slash down the front, danger code for don't eat this, even if you're starving. Inside is a batch of grain that went wrong. It smells like something that crawled out of a demon's armpit and got rejected by a hungry goat. You gag because you're still human, and the healer laughs gently. It's a teaching moment. They explain that not all molds are bad. In fact, some, like the bluish-green fuzz on certain fermented loaves, were sometimes harvested intentionally for infections. Fringe historians even speculate that the Nubians had an intuitive grasp of microbial life, though they obviously didn't have microscopes. Historians still argue whether their careful mold harvesting was true early antibiotic science or just an uncanny coincidence that happened to save lives. Either way, you're impressed, and a little queasy. To ensure safety, villagers developed ways to test mash before using it as medicine. One involves feeding a little to a chicken. If the bird's fine the next morning, the mash passes. You witness this firsthand, an older man gently feeding a paste to a bored-looking hen, then tying a strand of blue-dyed linen to the coop so everyone knows it's a test zone. The chicken clucks without complaint, and you suspect this isn't her first strange breakfast. The afternoon turns toward plant knowledge again, and this time the focus is cloves. Yes, actual cloves, not just for cookies. The Nubians didn't grow them locally, but traders brought them up the Nile from far-flung markets. Expensive, rare, and treasured, cloves were crushed into oil and applied to sore gums. You're given a tiny pinch and told to hold it under your tongue. It's strong, like setting a fragrant fire in your mouth, but undeniably effective. The pain, what little remains, retreats even further. You wonder how many aching teeth it took to figure this one out. Evening brings an unusual ritual. Not healing this time, but gratitude. You're taken to a low shrine near the fields, where women place bowls of old mash, long past its useful stage, at the base of a carved stone figure with barley stalks etched into its chest. It's a fertility symbol, yes, but also a kind of patron of health and fermentation. You help place the offerings, sticky and warm, and murmur a few awkward words under your breath. The healer doesn't laugh, they nod, because even clumsy thanks are still thanks. Later, by the fire, you overhear a story. One of the elders talks about a tooth so bad it turned a prince into a monk. Supposedly, he wandered out of the palace into the wilds and didn't return until a healer cured him with fermented sorghum mash and powdered hippo tooth, which, frankly, sounds made up. But maybe not. The fringe details of Nubian healing always blur the lines between medicine and myth. Historians still argue whether oral traditions like this one are metaphor or memory, but in this moment, it doesn't matter. The story lands. The stars are thick tonight. You lie back on a mat dusted with ground acacia and stare upward, barley mash still faintly tingling your tongue. You can't quite explain it, but something in you is changing. You're not just collecting knowledge, you're embodying it. Your movements are slower, your breathing more deliberate. You even catch yourself checking the smell of your breath by cupping your hand and breathing into it like someone who finally understands that stinky mouths are historical problems too. At the edge of the village, a woman sits humming beside a row of pots, each filled with mash fermenting at different stages. She invites you over and opens one. The scent is rich, slightly sweet, a little sour, not unpleasant. She dips a wooden stick inside and tastes it, nods, then offers you the stick. You hesitate, then accept. The flavor is complex, like sourdough and salt and something floral. She smiles. "This is medicine now," she says. "Tomorrow it will be bread again." That idea sticks with you. The cycle of grain to mash to healing paste to food again. Nothing wasted, nothing static. You think back to your own medicine cabinet at home, all plastic bottles and expiration dates and child-proof lids. It feels clunky now, detached, like a shortcut that skipped the understanding. Before bed, the apprentice gives you one last surprise. A small bundle of dried barley mash pressed into a cube and wrapped in fig bark. "For the road," she says, though you're not sure when or if you'll leave. You tuck it away like a secret, a keepsake, or maybe a ticket back. Your gums are quiet now, not perfect but peaceful, like the ache has become a whisper, not a warning. And you're left with something better than relief. You're left with understanding. Not the textbook kind, but the kind that lingers in your fingertips, your breath, your bones, the kind you won't forget. You curl into sleep with the soft throb of the village around you, the murmur of old songs, the click of pottery, the slow drift of wood smoke through the rafters. You no longer feel like a guest here. You feel like part of a longer story, one that's fermented slowly over centuries. And that story's just getting good. You stir from your sleep before dawn, not because of pain this time, but because of the smell, earthy, yeasty, and oddly inviting. It's coming from a wide pit outside the healer's hut, where steam is rising in soft tendrils like lazy ghosts stretching their arms. Today, the healer tells you, is for the mash ovens. These aren't your average baking pits. They're long, deep trenches lined with hot stones and covered with woven mats, and they're used not just to cook, but to transform. The mash that's been fermenting over the past few days, barley, millet, sometimes even old root vegetables, gets heated just enough to activate the good bacteria without killing them off. It's part pasteurization, part magical ritual, and definitely part community theater. You're given a carved paddle and asked to stir one of the pots while it heats. The smell hits you like a warm blanket soaked in vinegar and fresh grass. It's not exactly pleasant, but it's convincing. You stir slowly, carefully, and listen to the healer murmur stories of the heat gods, mythic figures who protected the mash from souring or exploding. There's one tale about a vengeful spirit who once cursed an entire village with endless toothaches after they skipped the proper chant during mash fermentation. You laugh, but the healer doesn't. Mash listens, they say. And honestly, after everything you've seen, you're not going to argue. Today you learn a new detail about the mash mixture. How it sometimes includes traces of copper powder. Not enough to poison, just enough to tint the paste greenish and, allegedly, draw out heat from inflamed gums. Historians still argue whether this trace metal treatment had real antimicrobial effects, or if it was more symbolic. Some link it to spiritual cooling, a concept that pops up in several ancient African healing traditions. You press a dab of this copper-tinged paste against your gum and wait. There's no buzz or tingle like the clove oil, but there's a sense of heaviness lifting, almost like the mash is drawing something out. Or maybe that's just the power of suggestion, you think. Either way, it works. Your job this morning is to help wrap the treated mash into small doses, little clay thimbles stuffed with warm paste and capped with linen soaked in cedar oil. These aren't just for your use. They're going to other villages, passed along by runners and traders who know exactly where the pain is greatest this season. Because, fun fact, ancient Nubians had toothache seasons. Not officially, but informally. Right after the first grain harvest, when people chewed a little too much roasted barley and didn't drink enough water, teeth would crack, gums would swell, and the healer's work would spike. You write a little symbol in the wet clay of one packet, a crooked smile with a sun above it. Optimism, you say. The apprentice laughs and scratches a spiral next to it, which apparently means don't die. Both seem appropriate. Lunch is a quiet affair, taken beside the river with a bowl of fermented lentil mash spread on flatbread. It's sour and filling and exactly what your body wants. A few kids nearby are playing with dried stalks of grain, pretending they are swords, and one of them dramatically clutches his cheek and falls into the water like he's been struck by a toothache demon. Everyone laughs, including you. You're struck by how normalized all this is, how something that once dominated your every waking thought has become just another part of the story, something to poke fun at once the sting fades. You spend the afternoon learning how to preserve mash for travel. The technique involves pressing it into thin sheets on sun-baked tiles, letting it dry, then grinding it back into powder. When needed, you just add water or saliva to reactivate it. You're told that ancient Nubian warriors carried this powder in pouches during campaigns, and that the high priests of Kerma kept secret variations with added herbs like myrrh and sycamore bark for treating high-status mouths. Fringe historians love this detail, mostly because of a rumored grave unearthed in the 1920s that contained a set of gold-plated molars, and a small sealed jar of barley mash powder. Whether that was ceremonial or actually used is still up for debate, but the image alone is enough to spark your imagination. You picture a prince grimacing, reaching into a velvet pouch, and dabbing mash on his aching royal gums before going back to bossing people around. Evening rolls in with its usual dusty pink skies and scratchy lullabies from a distant lyre. You help carry the finished mash doses to a granary, a cool, dark room dug into the earth, where jars rest like fat, sleepy beetles in tight rows. It's surprisingly organized. Each jar marked with a symbol indicating who it's for: children, elders, the toothless but still gum-sore crowd. You notice one marked with your name, not your real name, but the nickname the kids gave you, Shoeface. It's affectionate, you think. After sunset, the healer invites you to a quiet corner of the village wall, away from the noise. They tell you about an ancient practice, one they don't do anymore, but that used to be part of extreme cases. When no paste or powder worked and the pain threatened madness, the Nubians would perform a ritual incision, opening the gum slightly and inserting a mash-soaked linen strip deep into the socket. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't painless, but it worked. Usually, you shiver a little, imagining the grit and pressure, the faint scream swallowed by hot mash and incense smoke. We don't do that now, the healer says. Too much risk, too many spirits to appease. You nod, grateful for the relative gentleness of your own recovery journey. But you still can't help wondering if the mash ever whispered back. Before bed, you sit by the fire with the apprentice. They ask what you'll do when the pain is truly gone. You don't know how to answer, not because you haven't thought about it, but because it's shifted. You came here wanting to fix something. Now you just want to understand more, to follow the mash's path backward through time. Maybe visit the ruins of Kerma, or float down to Mera and see what herbs their fermenters used. The idea of returning home with just toothpaste and a dentist bill feels flat, like chewing on stale grain. You fall asleep later than usual, staring up at the ceiling's crisscross of beams and cobwebs. Your cheek doesn't throb. Your gums don't scream. All you feel is the steady pulse of your own breath, the memory of copper paste on your tongue, and the faintest hint of mint smoke drifting in through the doorway. You're not healed completely, but you're something better curious. And in this village, that's how all healing begins. You wake to rain. A soft, whispery drizzle that drapes itself over the village like a sleeping cat. It slips down the sides of the huts, pools gently in the cracks of clay tiles, and turns the earth under your feet into something halfway between velvet and porridge. The healer greets you with a grin and a cloak made of woven flax that smells like wood smoke and pepper leaf. Today, you're going mushroom hunting, and not just for any mushrooms. These are the wild, elusive, often slightly poisonous fungi that ancient Nubians sometimes gambled with in their quest for stronger medicine. You squelch through the wet reeds along the Nile's edge, following the healer and a wiry man with a basket so patched it looks like it's been reincarnated at least 3 times. The man is a gatherer, a specialist. He doesn't talk much, just sniffs the air like a bloodhound and points silently whenever he spots a promising patch of mold or mushroom nestled against a rotting log. You start to realize this isn't just about finding ingredients, it's about testing fate. Because some of these fungi, when fermented properly, become potent antiseptics. Others, well, don't. And ancient Nubians knew this line was thin enough to slice a breath in half. The healer hands you a small scroll made of bark with symbols etched into it: sun, rain, jawbone, feather. It's a forager's guide, and it's more poetic than scientific. Feather means soft bite. The healer says jawbone means beware. You find a cluster of stubby gray mushrooms with red flecks. They look angry. The gatherer nods slowly, then slices one open to reveal a blue, almost glowing interior. These are for rubbing, he says, not swallowing. Historians still argue whether ancient Nubians truly understood the psychotropic effects of some of their fungus-based mash additives, or if they just stumbled into spiritual trips while trying to treat inflamed gums. You're not keen to find out firsthand, so you pocket a tame-looking brown cap and move on. Back at the village, the rain slows to a mist, and you help prepare the gathered mushrooms for mash infusion. It's delicate work. Each cap is sliced, smoked gently over myrrh-soaked coals, then ground with a stone that's been used for so long it's almost smooth. The resulting powder is bright as ochre and smells like the inside of an old library, and a lemon rind had a mildly threatening child. You mix it into a small batch of fermented barley mash and apply it to your molars, just in case. There's a strange cooling effect. Not pain relief exactly, but your teeth feel more distant, like they've wandered off to think about their life choices. Later, you're invited into the granary again, but this time not as a student. The healer wants your help reorganizing the mash library. Yes, it's a real thing. Dozens of labeled jars, each containing different combinations of mash and medicine: mint, clove, garlic, crushed locust shell, ash from sacred cedar bark. Some jars are over 10 years old, sealed with resin and marked with symbols only the healer can fully decode. You ask if they still use the oldest ones. The healer just taps one with a golden spiral on it and says, "Only when the pain speaks the old language." You don't know what that means, but your gums twinge slightly out of respect. One jar catches your eye. It's blackened with soot and sealed with obsidian shards bound in twine. The apprentice pulls it back quickly. That's from the fire-mouth season, they whisper. You learn that centuries ago, a drought combined with a strange grain disease caused widespread gum infections, so severe people believed demons were crawling inside their mouths. Healers fought back with their strongest mash, one mixed with volcanic ash and bitter tree sap. It worked, but it also burned. Literally. People came out the other side healed, yes, but with gums tough as bark and teeth that no longer sparkled. Emergency medicine, the healer says, like setting a fire to kill a fire. You quietly hope you'll never need that one. After lunch, a traveler arrives in the village with a tale of a northern village plagued by a different kind of oral affliction, one that makes gums bleed at the slightest touch. Scurvy, you think, but the Nubians wouldn't have called it that. They called it the wilt and treated it with citrus-like roots traded in from Cushite Hill Gardens. The traveler requests mash with yellow root and clove, ingredients you've helped mix before. You're asked to prepare his dose. You do carefully, and he thanks you with a carved bead that looks suspiciously like a molar. You don't ask where he got it. Evening brings storytelling again, and tonight's tale is a little more surreal. It's about a crocodile who wanted to be a healer. He envied humans for their teeth, not just their shape, but the way humans seem to care for them, clean them, mourn them when they were lost. So the crocodile climbed out of the Nile and asked a village elder to teach him how to ferment grain. The elder agreed, but only if the crocodile promised never to eat another human. The crocodile agreed, learned to make mash, and now swims the Nile, curing fish of toothaches and snapping at anyone who uses moldy mash without permission. Historians still argue whether these animal healer stories are metaphor for trade guilds or remnants of older, animist traditions. You just like the idea of a mash-making crocodile, honestly. You fall asleep beside a warm jar of fresh mash, wrapped in cloth like a sleeping baby. Your dreams are foggy but kind, flickers of red mushrooms, a silent chicken nodding at you in approval, the gentle hum of a jawbone drum. Your gums don't hurt, not even a little. You press your tongue along your teeth and smile, not because you're fully healed yet, but because you now understand the ache. And maybe, just maybe, you'll miss it when it's gone. You awaken to a sun that feels like a soft spotlight on your face, filtered through woven palm leaves. The village is humming with a different energy today. There's a festival, or maybe just a celebration of healing. Children with freshly polished teeth run laughing between the stalls, their parents offering bits of sweet date bread and thick honey wine. You're handed a small cup of fermented sorghum, its tang sharp but comforting, like an old friend you didn't expect to see. The healer explains that this isn't just a party. It's a ritual to honor the mash, the grain, and the healing spirit that flows through both. The whole village participates, from the youngest to the oldest, and you feel strangely honored to be part of this intimate, earthy communion. You follow the healer to a shaded pavilion where elders sit cross-legged, passing around small clay bowls filled with various mash blends. They taste carefully, murmuring approval or shaking heads. The healer points out one jar that smells faintly of frankincense and wild thyme. This is their secret recipe for stubborn toothaches that refuse the usual cures. You get to help mix a fresh batch, grinding dried herbs with a stone pestle until the scent fills the air, and then folding the powder into warm mash until it looks like brown silk. Historians still argue whether the frankincense was more than symbolic, whether its antibacterial properties were actually harnessed or simply honored in ceremony. Either way, the mix tastes like a hug and a warning all at once. Midday, you're invited to observe a healing session. A middle-aged woman arrives with swollen cheeks and eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights. The healer examines her mouth with a practiced eye, then selects a mash blend infused with clove, myrrh, and a pinch of crushed charcoal. They carefully apply it to her gums and then wrap it with strips of linen dipped in a cooling herbal oil. The woman's face relaxes almost immediately, the tightness around her eyes easing. You notice the healer's hands are steady, deliberate. This isn't just medicine, it's art. And you're beginning to see why the ancient Nubians considered healers both scientists and poets. Between sessions, you wander through the marketplace and notice something unexpected. An old woman selling tiny bags of fermented grain mash shaped into beads. For when the pain sneaks in, she says with a wink. You buy one, curious. She explains that these beads were worn as talismans, slowly releasing medicinal properties throughout the day. It's a clever way to keep pain at bay without constant reapplication. Fringe historians debate the efficacy of these beads, some arguing they were more psychological than pharmacological, a form of early placebo. You decide to keep it anyway, pocketing the little bead like a lucky charm. The afternoon drifts by with stories and laughter, and you learn about a curious folk belief that teeth can sometimes talk through dreams. If a toothache lingers despite all remedies, it means the tooth wants you to listen. Maybe a forgotten promise, a hidden fear, or a long-lost memory. You're told to pay attention to your dreams tonight. The healer smiles knowingly and says, "Mash can soothe the body, but sometimes it's the soul that needs healing." You tuck that thought away like a secret recipe. As dusk falls, you join the village around a fire, where the healer performs a ritual chant. The sound is low and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The chant calls to the spirit of the grain, asking for continued protection and healing power. You feel the vibrations in your chest, calming and mysterious. The healer's eyes shine in the firelight, reflecting a deep connection to something ancient and unspoken. You realize that healing here isn't just about fixing teeth. It's about belonging, about being part of a story that stretches back through the ages. That night, your dreams are vivid. You see rows of golden fields swaying under endless skies, hear the hum of fermentation bubbling softly in hidden jars, and taste the sharp, sweet tang of mash on your tongue. A voice whispers, soft and warm, reminding you that pain is a teacher and healing is a journey, not a destination. You wake with a smile, your gums calm and your heart lighter. You're still on the path, but for the first time, you're walking it with eyes wide open. And that feels like healing enough for now. You rise to a morning cloaked in mist, the air heavy with earth and promise. The village breathes quietly around you, a soft chorus of roosters and distant waterfowl. Today, you join the healer on a journey beyond the riverbanks, into the wild grasses where the most potent grains grow, the forgotten staples of Nubian agriculture. You follow narrow paths lined with wild barley and millet, their seed heads bowing as if whispering secrets to one another. The healer stops, kneels, and brushes the grains between their fingers, explaining how ancient Nubians believed these plants held the essence of health itself. The fermentation of these grains was no accident but a sacred ritual, a way to unlock their hidden power and bind it to healing magic. As you walk, the healer points out clusters of wild herbs growing among the stalks, juniper berries, wild mint, and a particularly fragrant leaf called snake's breath, so named because it was said to ward off evil spirits from the mouth. You help gather these with reverence, the cool leaves brushing your skin like a soft apology from the earth. Historians still argue whether the spiritual aspect of snake's breath was a clever metaphor for antiseptic qualities or a genuine belief in unseen forces. Either way, it's a reminder that healing was as much about the heart as the body. Back in the village, the healer demonstrates the ancient art of grain fermentation for mash preparation. You watch as the grains are soaked in water from a sacred spring, then left to ferment in earthen pots sealed with wax and wrapped in palm fronds. The slow transformation fills the air with a heady scent, earthy, sour, alive. You learn that timing was everything, too short and the mash lacked potency. Too long and it turned sour beyond use. The healer hums an old tune to mark the days, a melody passed down through generations. You find yourself humming along, the tune weaving into your memory, like a lullaby for the earth. Afternoon brings a visit to the village smith, who fashions small tools used for dental care, bone picks, wooden scrapers, and delicate tweezers crafted from hippo ivory. You marvel at the precision, a blend of artistry and utility. The smith explains how these tools were carefully maintained and often passed down as heirlooms, symbols of health and care. You run a finger over the smooth edges, imagining the gentle tug of a stubborn grain lodged between teeth. Fringe scholars debate whether these tools were common household items or reserved for the elite, but you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. Later, you participate in a communal mash tasting, where various blends are sampled and ranked. You're surprised at the subtle differences, some smooth and honeyed, others sharp with herbal bitterness. The healer insists that each mash was tailored to different ailments, a personal touch to healing. This handcrafted medicine contrasts sharply with modern mass production, where pills lack personality and jars lack soul. You savor each sip, feeling the grain's ancient strength pulse through you. As the sun sinks low, you join the villagers in a soft song, a hymn to the river and the grain. The voices rise and fall like the tides, a reminder that life and health flow in cycles. You remember the tales of grain gods and river spirits, figures both mythical and real, who guided the hands that harvested and healed. Tonight, you feel a thread connecting you to those ancient hands, rough, tender, and full of hope. Before sleep, the healer shares one last story, about a grain that fermented too long and grew wild, turning into a bread that could heal even the deepest wounds, but could also bring madness if eaten in excess. You ponder the fine line between remedy and poison, the delicate balance ancient Nubians navigated every day. You close your eyes, feeling the weight and wonder of their world settle gently over you, a soft cloak woven from grain and spirit. You wake to a sky painted in soft rose and gold. The air smells faintly of toasted grain and drying earth. Today, the healer takes you to the edge of the desert, where the land stretches wide and harsh, a place where survival demands more than just skill. It requires a deep respect for the fragile balance between life and decay. Here, a fermented grain mash is not just medicine, but a lifeline. You watch as the healer carefully tends to a small fire pit, over which they warm a thick, amber-colored brew made from fermented millet mixed with crushed desert herbs. The steam rises in lazy spirals, carrying scents both foreign and comforting, like ancient secrets whispered through the heat. You learn that the desert mash serves many purposes. Not only does it soothe toothaches, but it also acts as a shield against the dryness that can crack gums and turn a small ache into something much worse. The healer explains how this remedy evolved from necessity, a product of ingenuity forged in one of the toughest environments on Earth. It's a reminder that ancient Nubians didn't just adapt, they thrived. The fermented grain becomes a metaphor for resilience, its sourness a taste of endurance. As you sip the warm mash, the healer points out a cluster of desert plants growing nearby. The bitter root, known for its pain-numbing qualities, and a curious succulent whose sap is said to seal wounds quickly. You help gather these with a careful hand, mindful of the delicate ecosystem that clings stubbornly to life in this arid expanse. Scholars still debate whether the desert mash's effectiveness was primarily chemical or ritualistic, a blend of both science and spirit. You decide it doesn't matter. Sometimes healing needs a little magic. Later, you watch as the healer demonstrates how to prepare a mash poultice from desert ingredients, applying it carefully to a small cut on your finger. The cool paste stings briefly before settling into a soothing balm. You feel the connection between earth and body deepen, the raw power of nature working in quiet harmony with human touch. The healer shares stories of desert nomads who relied on these remedies, passing knowledge down through generations despite the harshness of their world. Their survival was a testament to the grain's quiet strength. As the sun dips low, casting long shadows over the sand, you sit by a flickering fire with the healer and a small group of villagers. They share tales of grain spirits that wander the desert at night, protecting those who respect the land and punishing those who take without giving back. The stories feel alive, breathing through the crackling flames and the soft night air. You wonder if the spirits are real or simply stories told to teach respect and balance, but either way, you feel the weight of their presence. Night falls fully, and you lie beneath a sky scattered with stars so bright they almost seem close enough to touch. Your gums ache less than before, and your heart feels full with the day's lessons. You realize that healing here is not just about curing pain, but about living with the land, understanding its rhythms and mysteries. You drift off with the taste of desert mash lingering on your tongue, a reminder that even in the harshest places, life finds a way to soften the edges. You awaken to the scent of damp earth and fresh grass. The village is quiet but alive, the soft murmur of water from the nearby Nile weaving through the morning air. Today, the healer invites you to explore the river's edge, where the mash-making tradition mingles with the bounty of water plants and fish. You follow the glistening path of the Nile, its surface shimmering with light like spilled jewels. The healer explains how fermented grains weren't just for toothaches, but part of a broader medicinal culture tied deeply to the rhythms of the river and its cycles. You learn that the interplay between land and water gave rise to unique remedies, blending grain mash with aquatic herbs and minerals to soothe not just gums but whole bodies. You kneel beside a patch of reed beds and watch as the healer gathers tender shoots and roots, explaining that some river plants were fermented alongside grain mash to amplify their healing power. The smell is earthy and fresh, a sharp contrast to the thick, sour scent of fermented grain alone. You taste a small spoonful of mash mixed with crushed water lily leaves, the flavor a surprising blend of sweetness and sharpness, like the river itself, both calm and unpredictable. Historians still argue whether the addition of aquatic plants was a widespread practice or localized to certain river communities. You decide to savor the mystery. As the day unfolds, you witness a healing ceremony on a small raft bobbing gently on the Nile. The patient, a fisherman with a chipped tooth and swollen gums, receives a careful application of mash infused with fermented lotus petals and crushed fish bones. The healer uses tools carved from river reeds and smooth stones, their movements slow and deliberate. The ceremony is both practical and symbolic, a ritual that honors the river's power to nourish and heal. You catch the faint sound of water lapping against the raft, mingling with the healer's soft chants, a lullaby for the aching mouth. Later, you join the community in a festival celebrating the grain harvest and the river's bounty. The air is filled with music and laughter, and you watch as dancers sway in rhythm, their movements mirroring the flowing water. You bite into a piece of fermented grain bread glazed with honey, the taste rich and warm. You overhear whispers of a rare mash recipe said to cure not only toothaches, but also bad dreams and restless nights. Fringe researchers debate if this was a metaphor or an actual medicinal concoction, but you like to think it's both, a reminder that healing is never just physical. As twilight deepens, the healer tells you about a fascinating practice, using fermented grain mash as a teeth-strengthening chew, much like modern chewing gum. This early gum helped clean teeth, freshen breath, and possibly release gentle pain relief. You try a small piece, its texture firm but yielding, the flavor a mellow sourness that lingers like a secret. The idea of ancient dental gum tickles your imagination, blending the practical and playful sides of human ingenuity. You chuckle softly, thinking about how some things really do stand the test of time. As night falls, you sit by the riverbank, watching stars ripple on the Nile's surface. You feel a deep connection to this land and its people, to the water and the grain, to the ancient wisdom fermented slowly like the mash itself. Your toothache is a quiet echo now, a reminder of the journey you've shared with healers, farmers, and storytellers. You close your eyes, the river's lullaby carrying you gently towards sleep, wrapped in the comforting embrace of the Nile's endless flow. You rise in a dawn that feels softer than usual, the sky brushed with pastel blues and pinks. The village around you is stirring slowly, the familiar scent of fermented grain mingling with the sharp tang of morning dew. Today, the healer introduces you to the complex world of oral hygiene rituals, a practice surprisingly sophisticated for its time. You watch as they carefully prepare a paste from fermented grain mash mixed with powdered charcoal and crushed wild mint, a blend designed to clean teeth and freshen breath. The paste smells faintly smoky and minty, like a campfire in a forest clearing. You're handed a small twig, stripped and frayed at one end, the ancient toothbrush, ready for use. You mimic the healer's slow, gentle strokes along your teeth and gums, feeling the coarse paste scrub away the residue of the day before. It's a strangely satisfying sensation, gritty yet refreshing, like polishing a well-loved wooden bowl. The healer explains that Nubians understood the importance of daily dental care long before toothbrushes became common elsewhere. You marvel at the thought that something as simple as fermented grain mash could play a central role in oral hygiene. Historians still debate how widespread these practices were, and whether they were limited to the wealthier classes or common among all people. You choose to believe the latter. It feels more honest. Throughout the day, you explore other hygiene customs, like rinsing with diluted mash to soothe inflamed gums and prevent infection. The healer shows you how a mouthwash made from fermented grain and crushed myrrh was a prized remedy, its antiseptic qualities celebrated both in medicine and ritual. You taste a tiny sip of the mouthwash, bitter, sharp, but with a lingering sweetness. It's a taste that stays with you, a reminder of the complexity hidden in simple ingredients. Fringe scientists wonder if these rinses had any real effect or were primarily psychological comfort. But in the quiet moments between doubt and belief, you find your own answer. Later, you join a small circle where women share stories about beauty and health, passing down oral care tips from mother to daughter. You hear about a beloved tradition of tooth blessings, where children receive gentle prayers and mash treatments to protect their smiles from early decay. These customs remind you that healing is as much about community and care as it is about ingredients and formulas. The healer smiles and says, "A toothache might bring pain, but it also brings us together." You feel the warmth of that truth like a balm on your tongue. As evening falls, you watch a final demonstration of mash-based remedies designed for long journeys. These dense, nutrient-rich blends were carried by traders and travelers to stave off illness and tooth pain during harsh desert crossings. You imagine the relief of a weary traveler biting into a small, fermented grain cake, the pain dulling just enough to keep going. The healer hands you a piece wrapped in palm leaves, the taste earthy and bittersweet, a token of resilience. You tuck it away, knowing you'll carry a piece of this ancient healing wherever you go. Night deepens, and the village settles into a gentle hush. You lie back, chewing softly on the grain cake, and think about how these traditions, rooted in the land and fermented slowly through time, still echo in our modern world. Your toothache is now a distant murmur, a reminder of the journey you've taken, the people you've met, and the timeless dance between pain and healing. You wake to a dawn so soft it feels like a whisper, the light folding gently across the village rooftops and spilling over fields ripe with grain. Today marks your last day with the healer, a day steeped in reflection and quiet discovery. As you wander through the familiar paths, you sense the deep roots of ancient Nubian knowledge embedded in every stalk of grain, every fermented batch of mash. The healer shares stories of how these remedies were more than just medicine. They were acts of faith, tradition, and community, passed down with care like precious heirlooms. You feel the weight of generations resting lightly on your shoulders, a connection woven from earth, water, and time itself. You revisit the preparation of the mash, this time focusing on the delicate balance of fermentation, where patience turns simple grains into potent medicine. The healer's hands move with practiced ease, folding in crushed herbs, monitoring temperatures, and sealing pots with soft beeswax. The scent fills the air, a complex perfume of sour earth and sweet hope. You realize that fermentation was both science and art, a slow alchemy that mirrored life's own rhythms. Historians still argue whether the spiritual significance or practical effects came first, but you suspect they blossomed together, inseparable and entwined. Later, you join the villagers in a quiet ceremony at the riverbank, offering thanks for the grain's bounty and the healing it brings. The water laps gently at your feet, cool and steady. As elders sing songs that have echoed across millennia, you watch children play, their laughter mingling with the breeze, and you see how healing, like the river, is continuous, flowing from one generation to the next. The healer's voice softens as they remind you that even the simplest remedy can carry profound meaning, that every bite of fermented mash is a thread in the vast tapestry of human resilience. As the day wanes, you sit by the fire, the healer's stories turning to the curious and the quirky, the wild grains that fermented themselves into strange, bubbly concoctions, the toothpicks fashioned from crocodile bones, and the belief that fermented grain mash could, at times, awaken spirits. These tales remind you that healing was never just about the body, but about stories, fears, hopes, and the shared human experience. You smile softly, thinking how every culture has its mysteries and medicines, and how the ancient Nubians' approach still whispers lessons for us today. Night falls with a serene hush, and you lie back beneath a sky bursting with stars. Your toothache is gone, replaced by a calm that seems to come from knowing, from having touched something ancient and enduring. You breathe in the cool night air, letting the peace settle deep within you, wrapped in the warmth of grain and firelight. Wherever you are, you're now part of this story. A story of pain transformed, of life fermented slowly into healing and hope. You feel the night pull you softly towards sleep. Your mind drifts over the many faces, voices, and scents of the ancient world you've walked through. The fermented grain mash, once a humble remedy, now seems like a symbol of endurance, creativity, and connection. Remember that healing is not always fast or loud. Sometimes it's quiet, slow, and full of patience, much like the fermentation itself. Let this thought lull you gently as you sink deeper into rest. The river flows on. The grain ripens again, and the stories continue. You are part of that flow now, carried gently by the currents of history and memory. Let the quiet strength of ancient Nubians guide you as you drift, wrapped in the soft embrace of night. Sweet dreams are waiting just beyond the horizon.